The presenting sponsor of Moon Tower Soccer is FVF Law.
To find out what makes FVF a different kind of injury law firm, you can visit fvf.law.
Hello friends, thanks for listening to Moon Tower Soccer. This week we'll cover Austin FC's 1-1 draw in Los Angeles, the 1-0 loss at home to the Houston Dynamo, and then we'll also be joined by Apple TV's Brian Dunseth to preview the RSL match this weekend and to just kind of get his general thoughts on Austin FC and their season so far. My name is Landon Cottom, and I'm joined by a man who's drinking an enormous Modelo Especial. It's Jeremiah Bentley.
Hey everybody, I'm Jeremiah Bentley. Yeah, I was telling Landon I bought the 24-ounce Modelo Especial to drink at a chicken restaurant on Saturday night, and that place is no longer BYOB. So now I have giant beers sitting around for us. And earlier in the week, as I was, not that I'm not always paying a ton of attention, but as I was nodding off at the very end of the LAFC Austin game, which very much was ending way past my bedtime, I thought I heard my name on the broadcast. And then thinking I was hallucinating, I woke myself up, I rewound it, and I did for sure hear my name on the broadcast. And I'm curious about what your experience was on that. Like, did you catch it in the moment, or how did that go for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was sitting at home by myself watching it. Ashley was out of town for a work thing, and so I was sitting in the living room by myself, and all of a sudden I hear my name on TV from Max Bretos on the Apple TV broadcast, which very cool. We talked to Brian Dunseth was his partner on that call, so we talked to him a little bit about it during the RSL preview. But yeah, very, very cool and grateful to Max for that.
Yeah, so Max, if you're listening now in preparation for the game you're going to call this weekend, thanks again. You were always my very favorite guest, despite what I might have said after we had David Goss on. Max, always number one in my heart. And then another thing that happened to me today that I was going to talk to you about. So you have people come to your house to do various services and things, right? And so we're sitting at the house earlier in the day, and one of my dogs is in the house barking at something that seems to be outside. And then I walk out the door, and the pest guy is playing fetch with the other dog. And this is the moment I realized that they're corgis. I never really thought of that about being good guard dogs, but when strange people walk into my backyard, one of my dog's first response is to grab a tennis ball and run over to that person and have them throw the ball. So I don't think that my dogs are necessarily great guard dogs for the Bentley family. How does Tito react to strangers? Is he more reliable on keeping strangers away, or is that kind of what he looks for too?
He barks very loudly, but if you say his name or pet him, he's instantly your best friend. So he'll make a lot of noise at the very least. So that's good, I guess.
Yeah. So I don't think either one of us are have the threatening guard dog things in our lives.
So we talked about on the show last week that whenever we get to the point where games stop mattering, that we're going to try to choose joy and find ways to make the show fun. And so we have Brian Dunseth, a cool interview. So stay tuned and check that out. So that's part of how we're doing it. Another part is we're not going to spend a lot of time on these match previews. Well, some good takeaways. I feel like I did learn some stuff. I have some interesting points to talk about, but we're not going to belabor the point. And all that to say, Jeremiah, nothing can hurt us. You've got a giant beer. We have great guard dogs in our house. I'm wearing my Cat Bus shirt, which is one of my favorite shirts, and I'm just going to choose to be happy right now.
I like it. All right, let's get into this. Get into this show for this week then with that kind of spirit. And I'm excited. We've talked about. I think you had a game lined up. We've got at least one guest that's going to be kind of fun and positive lined up. So we're going to get through the rest of this season and into the off season in which hope springs eternal. In the most positive way possible. We're going to start with the story of the week here, which is that Austin finds new and interesting ways to underperform almost every game. Definitely, if you look at stretches of games, it happens this way. And you sent me a stat a few days ago about sort of how Austin's done over the last few games, which made me think back to early in the season. You remember there were games when Austin was getting 4 or 5 shots total in a match. Sometimes no shots on goal, sometimes one shot on goal. It was just a very It was like no attack. It was all disjointed. Everybody played slow. It was super disappointing. And now Austin continues to not get great results. I think they're like 1-5-2 over their last 8, maybe. But at least we're getting bad outcomes in a different and more hopeful way, I think. Maybe do you want to maybe share a little bit about what you found and how this ties into the narrative on the season?
Yeah, so in the last 3 games for Austin FC, they have around 6 expected goals, depending on what source you look at. It's somewhere between 5.7 and 6.2, but around 6 expected goals. They have scored 2 goals in those games. They have around 2.8 expected goals against and have given up 4 goals in those games. So, yeah, we talked about last week. I think you asked the question, like, okay, we have these players who look like they are absolutely better than what we had before. Why does it feel like the team is worse, or like they're at least getting worse results? And I thought of a good analogy today where you can say you have a car, and let's say it's a Toyota Camry, because that's what I drive. Perfectly fine car. But then let's say you upgrade that car with a Ferrari engine. And so, okay, this car should be better. This car, like, why isn't this car working better? And you look down and it's like, well, okay, this car only has 3 wheels. And so in theory, some of the parts are better. They're like performing better. If you do the diagnostics on how the engine runs and all this, it is performing better. But a car with 3 wheels is still not very good. And this is where I open up to, I think that this run of games is proof that a better coach is far from the only thing this team needs. There's 8 MLS games this season where Austin had 5 or fewer shots. Those are games that you can point at and say, a better coach, you should expect to be able to get more out of a team and at least come up with some type of plan or some type of system to generate more than 5 shots. There are games this season where you can point at how an opponent has exploited the same weakness over and over in Austin's defense. Those are games where you can point at and say a better coach makes an adjustment or has a better game to begin with. In the Houston Dynamo game, we had 18 shots, 5 shots on target, 1 shot off the crossbar, a total of 1.7 expected goals, and 0 goals in the back of the net. A coach can't fix that. Like, a coach does not fix that. No coach fixes that. They did everything right to set themselves up to win, except for the most important thing, which is putting a ball in the back of the net. And so this is where I'm like, a lot of people were upset that we didn't bring in a number 9 during the transfer window. And I was a little bit like, it doesn't matter. Like, let's get the pieces we can, because if we can't get the service to a number 9, what good are they? And in a game like this Houston game, I was like, okay, well, this is where we could have used the number 9, huh? Where, like, I think that makes a real difference. A high-level number 9 scores some of these goals, gets into moments where we do get good opportunities. And, I think that's a big difference. But, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot that needs to change in this offseason.
Well, now I was gonna read this quote from Josh Wolff about the Houston, right after the Houston match, that says a lot of those same things. But your car analogy reminded me of the. I'm gonna date myself. Have you ever heard the Johnny Cash song "One Piece at a Time"?
Yes. Yeah.
So over the course, he works at the I think it's a Chevrolet factory. And over the course of 20 years, he steals a whole car one piece at a time.
Yeah, it was,
and he puts it all together.
53, 54, 55.
yeah, that one. Yeah. So I think that's the Austin FC reference. For what we've seen out of this season. So yeah, that's a lot of what Josh says. It's not like we're doing a lot of things poorly other than the finishing. The defending has been solid. We don't give up shots, but expected goals, again, we have a way that we go about it. If you score goals, it gives you energy, it gives you momentum, it gives you belief. The way that we play is quite good with the ball, quite solid. And we have flexibility. The performances have picked up, but I can sit here and tell them to be more ruthless, be more shrewd in front of goal, be more clinical. But those are just words. But I guess that leads to sort of the elephant in the room. This is something we talk with Dunseth about a little bit, is this is a team that is not going to make the playoffs. I mean, is there any way that you think that the coach... Wait, I don't want to set you up like that. I do not believe there's any way that missing the playoffs 3 times in 4 years, the coach makes it, unless there's some... I don't know. There's this strange loyalty that Anthony Precourt has to Josh Wolff that transcends reasonable thought. Like, it seems... He's the 4th most tenured coach in the league at this point. Like, haven't got results in 3 or 4 years. Like, I don't think it makes sense to bring him back despite what has happened. But like, what's your perspective on where we go from here for 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I will always hold in two ideas in my hands. One of which is Josh Wolff was kind of hard done by with the roster that he was given throughout the entire existence of Austin FC, and struck lightning a little bit with that 2022 run. And that also he has not done enough with what he has been given. And so it's, I don't know. I feel for the guy a little bit, but also I like, regardless of what has happened so far, I do not have faith that he's the guy that can like take this team to their maximum potential going forward, even with a better roster. And so, I mean, just based on results alone, I don't see how you can keep him on and not have just like a major mutiny by the fans at some point.
Yeah, and at some point that becomes the thing, right? I mean, I think you've seen this in. It doesn't matter because the tickets are all sold now, but I think you've seen that in terms of like people showing up lately. I think this RSL match is going to be a really challenging one where the Texas Longhorns play, at 4:00, and I think Austin plays at 7, and I don't think there's like a ton of excitement. Like, we'll see what the crowd looks like, but that begins to hit people in the pocketbook. So I think for me, like, it's enough of sort of like the negative part of what's going on. So like, let's talk about, for the people who maybe are thinking about checking out for the last few games, like, why do people still tune in? And for me, it's like there's still because you've got a lot of new guys, and you got a lot of new guys who are talented and who are going to be the people who are going to be here down the road. Like, there's still plenty to see about the players. And one example I always go back to is in 2021, which was a really bad season. Like, we got to see, I think it was the very last game, right? Very last game at home, at least. Like the John Galler at fullback experiment, which hadn't happened because he was a winger. And then he ended up being an all-star the next season in 2022 at that position. So I think that's what I'm like holding my hat on to is what does Bukhari look like? What do the center backs look like? What does Svatak, like, can he integrate? Like, is he really good as we think he's going to be? Like, those are the things I'm going to be looking out for that make me still, I mean, not excited for playoff potential, but like interested in watching this team see out the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'll say, I think I say quite confidently that these last 2 games were Bukhari's 2 best games in an Austin shirt. And so it's exciting to see him put his stamp on the game a bit more. Svatak plays in both of these games. A few bumpy moments early on against LAFC, but really, really solid for most of these 2 games. So that's exciting to see. To get these 3 new guys on the field with some of the pieces that are going to be around for next year. Yeah, that is kind of what we have to look forward to at this point. So in order, I don't think we've said this outright yet, but in order for Austin to make the playoffs, we need to win all 3. There's 3 remaining games, right? 4 remaining games. Essentially, we need Minnesota to lose most of them, and we need to win most of them. And it's just not going to happen, right? And then on top of that, we have to have Dallas drop points as well so we can pass them again. It's just extremely unlikely at this point. And so, yeah, results-wise, it's hard to be excited about it. But I think there is still some fun stuff to look forward to. And hopefully those things will be worth watching in these games.
All right, let's take a break. We're going to talk a little bit more about both these matches and then get a little bit of a news and the Dunseth preview and do the best we can to sort of talk through what lies ahead for Austin.
No one is around.
Moontower Soccer is brought to you by our friends at FVF Law, the official injury lawyers of Austin FC.
FVF is a different kind of personal injury law firm dedicated to community, transparency, and client education. And they have their own podcast called Summary Judgment. Check it out wherever you get your podcasts.
You can go to FVF.law to find out what makes FVF a different kind of injury law firm and why understanding your legal options can dramatically change the outcome of a case. Once again, that's FVF.law. Amplify Credit Union is a member-owned financial cooperative that served the needs of Central Texans for over 5 decades. As a credit union, Amplify has no shareholders or parent companies. That means more of your money stays in the community.
Amplify has been the home of fee-free banking since 2022. Their free checking accounts come with 0 overdraft fees or minimum balances. That means Amplify's free checking accounts can help you get more mileage from your everyday spending.
Amplify membership is open to any Texas resident. Learn to trust your bank again at Amplify Credit Union. To learn more and to register for free parking at the Amplify Esperanza branch on game day, go to www.goamplify.com/moontower-soccer.
Moon Tower Soccer is brought to you by Tony C's Beer Garden, serving New York-style pizza and authentic Italian. Open in Round Rock in front of Del Diamond and on Anderson Lane near Shoal Creek Boulevard.
Their Anderson Lane Beer Garden is just 2 miles from Q2 Stadium. Stop by for pizza and a pint before all this year's home games, and with TVs on every wall, it's the perfect spot to watch all away games.
Tony C's has 30 beers on tap, featuring their Brewery of the Month, All Stop Brewing, and the Pizza of the Month, Mulberry Meatball, which features Chiola family meatballs, roasted red peppers, caramelized onions, and fresh mozzarella.
Don't forget 2 for Tuesday, where 2 pizzas are the price of 1 every Tuesday, and then Pitcher Perfect Thursday, where pitchers are half price on Thursdays. Dine in or pick up for lunch or for dinner. Find more info at www.tonycsbeergarden.com. All right, we are back. We have 2 games to get through, and then also our interview with Brian Dunseth. So we'll have to move through these fairly quickly, but I think that's for the best, probably. No?
Yeah, I think we're probably okay with that. So let's talk about the LAFC match. And I think I told you this on Saturday when we hung out before the game. You know, I don't often want to do 2 shows in a week, but knowing how Saturday night might turn out, I felt like LAFC was interesting enough, and there were enough storylines. In the absence of not knowing what was going to happen in Houston, maybe it was going to be fun to talk about. And then the worst possible outcome happened in Houston. So now we're just going to blow through the interesting parts of that. But I think going into it, I mean, everything looked dire, right? So Austin's missing 3 players on yellow card suspension, missing a player due to injury. So like you're looking at a club who's not very good on the road, playing a team that is pretty well in form, obviously more talented, which if we get into any of the details on the subs, I think is like almost unfair, the kind of players that LAFC brings off the bench. But Austin rolls with, is this right? 5 at the back. So it's Stuver, Biederu, Cascante, Svatak, Dessler, Gallagher.
It's complicated. It's
Josh Wolff said it was 5 at the back in his post-game interview, and I trust that he knew what he was trying to do.
In defense, yes. It was more or less a 5-2-3 while we were defending. And then against LAFC, it was kind of a 4-2-2. This we've talked about this on shows before, but there's a point where the numbers stop being helpful. But it was when we had the ball, it was 4 at the back, 2 holding midfielders, and then 4 people up there kind of doing different things. And then against Houston, it was same defensive shape, 5-2-3. And then 4-1-2-3. So that's really the shape of the midfield was a little different, and kind of the role that that O'Brien and Driussi were playing was a little bit different. For the most part, it was quite similar between these 2 games.
Yeah, and so then Austin comes out. So Predator Ring, Bakari, Rubio, Obier on the other starters. Austin comes out, I mean, like really strong, and especially like when we were looking at like what might be the talent gap. Felt like Austin was on the front foot for much of the first half. And I felt like my worry was this is one of these games where Austin was just like really solid for 30 minutes and then just like runs themselves ragged, and the disparity in talent overtakes, and then ends up being like a 2-0 loss or something like that. And luckily that did not happen. They continued to press forward throughout most of the match and really be more or less the better team on the night. It sort of in the margins, and it just came down to a couple moments that Austin did not pick up that win.
Yeah, and there are fewer chances in this game than there were in the Houston game, but they were doing a really good job of limiting LAFC's chances as well. And so the first big question asked of Stuver was in the 25th minute. Giroux hits one from about 20 yards out that is a beautiful shot towards the far corner. And Stuver just does a really good job to jump, fully extend, and get a hand on it. And then Austin's first good chance comes in the 44th minute, where Gallagher plays in a deep cross, finds Dessler sneaking in to the box on the far side. He has a window to beat Lloris on that near post, but hits it wide. I think I saw some criticism that maybe he should have headed it back across goal. I think the angle was too acute, so I think he tried the right thing and just didn't quite pull it off. But that's Austin's first really serious chance in the first half, even though they did look quite well. during this game, the first half, I had my eyes squinted, kind of looking sideways at Alan Chapman, the referee, thinking like, are you going to pull an Apple TV here and kind of be an LA homer and show glamour shots of all their players throughout the whole game? Because Eddie Segura was begging for a yellow card in the first half.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And finally, around 40 some odd minutes, he gives him one for persistent infringement. And at that point, I was like, okay, Alan, I see you, buddy. And I think he was trying not to like let it get out of hand too early, because he was letting them get away without yellows on stuff like that, and then calling fouls on Austin. And everyone was getting really frustrated because it felt a little imbalanced. But after the yellow card came out, I feel like he did do a good job of kind of managing that. So I was ready to be angry at him, but I think he justified himself in the end by giving that card to Segura there. And then, kind of doing a good job the rest of the time. But then Austin FC gets a goal in added time in the first half. Mikael Dessler is under pressure on the right sideline, plays a ball into space, just kind of hoping Bukhari can get to it. He's battling with Aaron Long on the way to the ball, is able to get it, kind of touches it through, turns into space, and is just leaves Long in his dust. Pushes into the box. He has numbers crashing on the backside. Finds Obrion kind of crashing the near post. The ball is a little behind him, but not too much. And then Obrion almost takes too long with it by taking a touch and not getting that shot off, but then is able to squeeze a shot away immediately when Eddie Segura is sliding in to block it, and it somehow just squeaks between Segura's feet and beats Lloris low to the right side. And Austin gets a goal with more or less the last touch of the first half.
Yeah, there wasn't much time left past that. So, yeah, Austin does go in up 1-0. No subs at halftime. Then I'm just going to talk through the narrative, and I want you to tell me whether you agree, like what you think about this. So, at 59, we get Elias Sanchez, star of Continental Tire ads, David Martinez for LA. Then we get Zardes for Rubio, Vicen for Dessler, and then I hear the chorus of online fans saying, like, Austin's got a 1-0 lead 60 minutes in, and now we're bunkering, and it's going to bite us in the rear end. And 2 minutes later, David Martinez picks up the goal and assist from Ryan Hollingshead, and it does bite us in the rear end. And all joy is lost in Austin. But we found out after the game that maybe there was a little bit more to it than that.
Yeah, well, I saw this sub happen, and I knew I didn't look online, but I knew exactly what was happening.
Well, you were right.
We're going 5 at the back. Who's bunkering? It's like, guys, we've been playing 5 at the back the whole game. We've been doing this the whole game. And so, like, it didn't change the shape at all, really. I think the thing you could say is that Leo Vicen is partly at fault. And so the sub they put on was involved, but mainly, let's walk through the goal and we can kind of talk through where blame lies. But Aaron Long plays a ball to Olivier Giroud's feet, kind of in the pocket. He drops in a little deeper to receive. Cascante steps to challenge that pass, which is what he's supposed to do. He's a little late as the ball gets there, and then Giroud just plays a really nice little flick-on pass behind him, which is not what Cascante is supposed to do. He's supposed to charge that and get there before that player can receive and do anything with it, and he's a little late, and Giroud's pass is good enough that just eliminates Cascante from the equation, essentially. And so Atuesta runs onto it in that space he plays into. They're 3v2 against Brendan Heinzike and Leo Vicenen. Atuesta kind of slow plays it, making Heinzike commit to him a little bit before playing Hollingshead to the left. He squares it to David Martinez, the young Venezuelan that had just been subbed on, and he taps it in for the goal. So whenever Atuesta first plays the pass, Vicenen clocks Martinez's run on his back shoulder, like towards the far post. But whenever he turns his head back towards the ball, Martinez does something really clever. And this is a kid who last time Austin FC played them, I think he got subbed at halftime because he was terrible. And so this is development here in real time where Väisänen checks his head, and Martinez sees this. And instead of continuing that direct run to the far post, he checks it back inside of Väisänen. And the ball is on Martinez's foot being played into the goal before Väisänen realizes what happened. And so, like, yeah, if there's criticism for subs, it's that, okay, Väisänen was involved here. But A, we were playing 5 at the back the whole game. It was not a shape change. B, Mikkel Dessler was injured and asked for a sub. He looked very happy to be coming off the field whenever he came. So I think in the other, like Rubio on the other end did not look happy to come off the field. I think you could quibble with that and say, like, Rubio looked pretty good for a lot of this game. Why pull him so early when he's maybe feeling it a little bit? But on the other one, like, I think you had to take Dessler off. Who else are you putting on in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, you don't really have another choice. Yeah, that's where I was going. It's like Dessler, I think at the moment a lot of people didn't realize that Dessler had to come off. And I can definitely see an argument on the other one. Like, Gyasi Zardes for 30 minutes of energy is usually like a pretty good option, other than him trying to play the full 90. So what other chances does Austin have here that we want to talk about before we sort of get to like storylines about the end of the match?
Yeah, I mean, there's really only a few other chances throughout the rest of the game. LA starts to slip a little bit deeper because a point is fine with them. They don't care. Like, it doesn't matter. They're far enough up that they're good. And so, there are a few other chances for both teams, but nothing much. Under different circumstances, this result in this performance, I would come away with saying you went to LAFC midweek, down players, looked like the better team for most of the game, limited their chances, got a little unlucky, and came away with only a point. Like, that's a good result for this team. But in these circumstances, these particular circumstances, I was like, this is not enough. That has to be a win. A game where you're playing that well, you have to win that. And they didn't do it. And I think this is like, it's not the end, but it puts them in such a difficult position going forward, which we'll talk about more in the Houston game. But like, yeah, it's just hard to say, like, yeah, in another situation, another season, another time, that's a great result, but not today.
Which is why our friend Max Bretos thought we would be happy at 91 minutes in with the performance. And honestly, like, they picked up a point on Minnesota, and going into the weekend, Austin was in slightly better. I don't remember what they went from like 6% to 10% chance of making the playoffs. So I think I want to just one game note, because we're not very good at remember these things. So Brad Suver makes team of the match day for the 4th time after this performance. And then we had this weird emo Sebastian Driussi retweeting, because Driussi's out on his 5th yellow card, so he's sitting at home, and during the game, scrolling through Twitter. This is like, Twitter's toxic. Nobody should spend that much time on Twitter, even though I do. This is a great example of why not. So Driussi is like retweeting people talking shit about him and his performance, and saying he's going to be out while the match is going on. How do you feel about that?
It's not a good look. It's a pretty bad look, I'd say. I mean, you forget these guys are young, and that there's a lot of pressure on them for being so young. But that's part of the territory. And like, when you're in that position of privilege, as this guy is, making millions and millions of dollars to play a game, and like the former captain of this club, even more makes it even worse, I think. But like, you can't be doing that. It's such a bad look. It's a bad look for you now. It's a bad look for your future employment. And so, yeah, it's not good.
It's not good. All right, I think let's just go off this one and get on to Houston. So now Austin's 4 points off Minnesota going to this match. We get players back. We're going to lose. Austin loses Matt Hedges. So Hedges is out. Dessler's questionable. Honestly, having listened to Josh's midweek press conference, didn't think we were going to see Dessler play. We got a rivalry match at home. We get Matthew McConaughey doing the heartbeat. I feel like your McConaughey opinion's well laid out here, and then also apparently is supposed to be like a local Latino musician to support Ham, which the club put out like the day before the match was going to be the heartbeat, and I guess McConaughey decided it was time for him to show up and do his thing. So that was kind of weird. But you get what you get.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to say anything. I overall, it's fine. Whatever. McConaughey's he's a good ambassador for the club, but just annoys me sometimes.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about this match. So we get Stuver. Let's talk about this lineup. I think you talked about it a little bit against LA. I was trying to figure out. I was like, is this a 4-2-4, 4-3-2-1, 5 something? Like you said, maybe it doesn't matter. So I'll go through the players. So we get Stuver back again, as always. Biru, Heinzeit, Cascante, and Dessler. We have Valencia and Ring sort of sitting deep in the midfield. Gallagher, Driussi, Bukhari, and Rubio playing some kind of forward. And it seems like it's a pretty solid 11, and a fairly well rested 11 to go out and play in a Houston match that was really, really important for Austin in terms of whether the rest of the season was still gonna matter for the playoffs.
Yeah, after the LAFC match, I was watching. I was more confused about what the lineup was going to look like in that game because of Hader O'Brien, Bukhari, and Gallagher all being in the team at the same time, while Biru and Dessler were in this team. Because sometimes, like, there's too many wingers. Oh, one of them might be a secret fullback, and okay, that works, but then like there's still too many wingers, and that was where I was confused a little bit. But it ended up being more or less the same shape. And after the LFC game, I was saying I think the idea here is for Driussi to play that role that that O'Brien was playing against LAFC, and that's more or less what ended up happening. Where defensively, it's a 5-2-3, so you have two central midfielders and then a line of three kind of leading the press and defending up there. O'Brien was the leftmost one of those against LAFC. That was Driussi in this game. Where the difference was in the attack, it would shift to, against LAFC, like a 4-2 something. But O'Brien was kind of existing in that interior pocket for a lot of the game, which is honestly, like, he did a lot of that with FC Dallas over the last couple of years. So it's not an uncomfortable role for him to kind of play that second forward, but playing off of another striker in those pockets on the interior lanes. And so he was kind of doing that against Houston. I think they felt like they could be a bit more aggressive attacking wise. And so it was Valencia as a lone six, and then Ring and Driussi as kind of those dual tens, like the normal offensive shape where it's like that 4-1-2-3 is what they flexed into, as opposed to the two deeper lying midfielders against LAFC.
So we get, it's like less than a minute in when Giassi almost gets the game opening goal, which would have probably made for a very different outcome.
Yeah, Gallagher skins Dorsey. I think he chops him twice and gets around him. Hits a ball on the ground. I'm thinking of a different one. But yeah, the very first one, it's Driussi plays a ball into the top of the box. Ring chests it down, and Zardes hits a ball on target. Doesn't really challenge the keeper there, but a good chance, some good energy to start the game. And then, is there any other like great chances? The one I was talking about, Gallagher skins Dorsey early on and like whips one across the goal mouth. Zardes is unable to get to it, and Bukhari rips one from a really difficult angle. Again, Bukhari, like, ball falls to him. It's a tough angle. He's got players to cut it back to on the inside, but takes the shot instead. Like, it's happening a little too often for comfort. I still don't think it's selfishness. I think it's just maybe a bit of lack of awareness that, like, okay, there is this cutback here. Let's take that instead of the shot in these moments sometimes.
Yeah, I think that was probably Austin's best shot in the first half. That was still pretty early, too. That was 14 minutes in. And it was one of these where, like, Austin would connect. It was just like they failed in the final third, right? Like, they would play through the midfield. They would look dangerous and just kind of fall apart in the final third. And that would be the story, I feel like, of the whole match for Austin. As far as XG goes, they get only 0.5 total in the first half, 3 times as much in the second half. So the second half was definitely Austin's more more
Tell me
threatening
if you
half
felt
of
differently
football.
about this. I still felt like we were the better team by far in the first half.
Absolutely. Yeah, the better team by far, but just for whatever reason, not making the connections that Austin needed to make. So yeah, we get to the half, 0-0. If you look at every momentum chart from every source, like it's mostly Austin. We continue that way almost throughout the whole match. We get these are halftime subs, right? Svatak comes up for Cascante, Pereira for Valencia. Both seem like solid calls, and players that are talented and players that can maybe change the way the game's going. And I feel like the Danny sub, especially like in a match that's 0-0, is like one that's chasing the win, which Austin needs to do, right? Because Austin cannot afford a draw. But I felt good about those, even though they didn't end up making a ton of difference in terms of outcome.
Yeah. Zardes gets another chance in the 55th minute. This is one of the bigger ones. Gallagher puts in a cross that brings Steve Clark off his line. He can't get to it. It goes just beyond Clark and finds Zardes. He heads the ball down at like a pretty acute angle back across the goal line, and it bounces off Mikhail's foot to deflect away from goal. You could call it a little bit unlucky, but if he heads it straight down, there's not a keeper in goal. And so there's no need, like you head it back across the goal mouth in order to make it difficult for the keeper. But when there's not a keeper, head it straight down. Right? You put it in. And like, I know it's harder, like easier said than done, right? To react in that moment and actually put it accurately anywhere. But like it's a moment, it's one of these mini moments where none of them were super easy misses, save one that we'll get to at the very end of the game from Alex Ring. But there's a lot of like pretty high percentage chances that Austin put away 0 of them, including in the 80th minute, Driussi gets a header in the like 8 yards out or something like that. It's off the crossbar. This is a long throw that ends up with him doing that kind of watching, waiting, ghosting a defender, and just popping up at the right moment. And in 2022, he scores it every time.
They always
this
go
season,
in. Yeah.
This season, it's off the crossbar into the crowd.
Yeah, and one of the things going back to the Obrian goal that this reminds me of is like Heider Obrian's goal makes him the leading scorer for Austin on the season with 7 or was it 6?
I think it's 7 now.
7
I could be
now.
wrong, but I think it's 7.
Yeah, I think it was 7. I should remember he's on my Golden Boot team. He's not my worst scorer. Yeah, 7. And then the another really good chance comes for John Gallagher right before the Houston goal. This one's at 82, just in the run of play with a decent shot inside the box that ends up being a save for Steve Clark. And why is Steve Clark not helping Austin out? He's always been so reliable.
Right. He's usually been pretty good to us. Houston's goal comes in the 83rd minute. So this is a corner kick to the far post. It gets headed back across the box. Karaskia goes for an overhead kick and connects with it. There's not a lot of power on it, and it's far enough out. It's probably 6-7 yards out. And so it's one of those where like Stuver's got a chance at this one. It's not far out of his reach. It's far enough away. There's not a lot of power on it. You think maybe he would be able to save this one, but takes a deflection off of Brendan Hines-Ike and just dips between Stuver's legs before he knows what happened. And so it's one of those, like, it's a little unlucky, but if you score some of these other chances, it doesn't matter. Like, that's soccer. Like, that these things happen. These little unlucky bounces happen. But if you take your chances in other moments, you counterbalance those things and they don't matter. But when you don't score ever, any unlucky bounce is a like a nail in a coffin, right?
Yeah, and this like the energy turned in the stadium for sure. People start fleeing for the exits. Austin has one more really good chance in extra time. I think this is the Alex Ring shot that you were going to talk about.
Yeah, so this is a really nice diagonal cross from Driussi. Finds an Owen Wolff run on the far side of the box. He has numbers crashing into the box with him, so he jumps up into the air and just gently lays it off back towards the penalty spot. Falls to Alex Ring on the penalty spot, there's players approaching, but no real pressure on him to take the shot. Like, it has to be first time, but he has time to take the right shot in that moment. And he blasts it over the bar. And this is the Alex Ring paradox, right? Like, this strikes again where he is somehow at the same time one of the best players on the team, but then because of his salary and MLS roster rules, he was also one of the players holding this team back the most. And MLS is a league where these two things can be true. And it is very much true this season and in this game and in this moment where he is one of the players most likely to find that space and for that ball to end up at his feet. But if you could call timeout and say, who do you want to take this shot? You're not picking Alex Ring.
It's not him. Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, let's just so like Austin finished this game in 11th. Not a lot of hope for the playoffs. I want to just talk about Alex
almost
Ring.
No hope. I feel like you're underselling it here. Like
almost no hope. Okay, that's fair.
It's
well, you talked about it.
A mathematical anomaly, like for us to make the playoffs. Like Minnesota has to stop playing soccer for the rest of the season, and we have to win every game pretty much.
Okay, so yes, very, very unlikely. I think the like playoff percentage are below 1%, but just because you talk about Ring, Michelle Sanchez actually asked him about where he was going to play in 2025 after the game, and he had a pretty good answer. He just like said, I'm trying hard, doing my best. It's up to me, my agent. And then we also had a quote, like it's an Instagram post from his wife this week in between sharing the saga of their neighbor and their Trump flag that I think it's falling apart or getting taken. I don't really understand what it is, but she talked about meeting with their agent. I think it was earlier today or maybe yesterday or whatever. It's like, I've kind of thought that this was like the Alex Ring's time in Austin was definitely completely over. Like, do you see a future where Austin gets him on a number that's like below the senior max, so it's friendly enough that it makes sense for somebody who's a leader in the locker room? I think one of the only, he and Stu were the only players that came over to the south end after the match. Like, is there a path forward where he does end up staying in Austin in a way that makes sense for Roto and for the player?
I hope so. I hope he does. It doesn't seem realistic to me, just because I think he can make more than what makes sense for Austin right now somewhere else. And I would not like think poorly. I would like, power to you, man. Go make your money because your career's over in a year or two, right? Like, go make as much money as you can while you can do it. Selfishly, I would love for him to stay on a low contract and stick around for the experience, the leadership, I as much trash as I talk about him as this huge role that he takes up in this team, if you can bring that off the bench every once in a while, be a role player in this team, that's huge. That's really, really big. So I hope so. I hope they can make that work, but I don't know. It doesn't seem realistic to me.
Well, then before we take a break again and get into the preview, do you want to talk about Jorge Giraldi's dumb question where he asked Josh Wolff if he was going to resign? Wait, actually, never mind. I'll just leave it as a statement. After the match, Jorge Giraldi again shut down the whole press conference by asking Josh a really dumb question about whether, if they didn't make the playoffs, if he would choose to resign with one guaranteed year left in his contract. And as you can imagine, Josh did not love that question and responded accordingly.
Like, grow up, man. Like, they owe you. We don't know how much he makes, right? It's probably a lot of money. And you're asking, will you walk away from money owed you based on the contract you signed out of honor for this game that you get paid to coach? Grow up.
No. All right, let's take a break, and then we'll cover like a few brief bits of Austin news, and we'll do the preview with Brian Dunseth. Moon Tower Soccer is brought to you by Sage Wilson Realty. The Sage Wilson team is made up of Austin experts who are client-focused and have over 30 years of combined real estate experience. Our friends at Sage Wilson Realty are giving away 2 tickets to an upcoming match. You can fill out the form in the show notes for your chance to win.
If you or someone you know or need Sage real estate advice in Austin, talk to our friends at Sage Wilson Realty. Be sure to check them out online at sagewilson.com.
Our premier sponsor is McGuire Woods Consulting, helping clients in the public affairs space from lobbying at the local, statewide, and federal levels to digital and communications campaigns across the country.
McGuire Woods Consulting has offices in 10 MLS cities and is proud to support Moon Tower Soccer and support Austin FC's statistically almost impossible march to the playoffs. Contact our friends at McGuire Woods Consulting at mwcllc.com for more information. All right, we are back. We're going to get to our RSL preview with Brian Dunseth, but first, we have a few pieces of Austin FC news. Jeremiah, where should we start?
Let's go with the twice a year the league puts out a roster profile, which gives all of us a breakdown of where people stand on the roster, who's filling international slots, what the DPs are, who the U22s, all the details are. This is the first time that we have details around people who were brought in the summer. So I think the two things that were the most interesting for me in terms of what we learned out of this, this lineup, because we knew a lot before, right? Like we knew Austin had chosen to only have 2 DPs. We knew that John Colemanich was the only U22. We knew that Austin had 7 internationals and sold the 8th spot to Atlanta. I think the questions would Dessler or Svatak be a TAM player? And so we got the news that neither one of them were, which is good for Austin. And I think these were both announced at the time we signed the players, but in terms of like Roto being committed to this project long term, both have deals through 2027 with 28 options. So that makes me maybe less stressed about Svatak not playing a lot, knowing that this is like the long game and not some kind of short term like possible stopgap opportunity for center backs.
Yeah, that's huge news. Like this is guys that Dessler we know now is one of the best players on the team. I think Svatak with the game and a half that we saw him play this week, like I was impressed. So I imagine.
Same. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So to have guys that are going to play, you're expecting to play big roles in this team, not taking up these huge money pieces. That's what has killed this team for the last 2 years, right? Is guys who are okay to poor taking up huge amounts of money off of the salary budget. And to have these 2 guys on those kind of numbers is huge. So that's really great news.
Yeah, that is really great news. Yeah, I was thinking of just for comparison's sake on this roster, other TAM players are Matt Hedges, Johan Valencia, Jesse Zardes, or 3, I think specifically that everybody would point to being less valuable and making more money. We continue to see these rumors out of South America that maybe Driussi is going to go somewhere and there's some desire, and there was like one rumor to Mexico, and I feel like all this is amplified by the tweeting. I don't know if there's anything to make out of this. Let's maybe go to the possible...
I had a question. I didn't see the Mexico thing. Where did that come from? Was that very, very Twitter rumory, or did this come from...
It was very, very Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very Twitter. I think it was Monterrey, but I'm not sure. Because really all I can remember was a blue team. So it's one of the blue teams from Mexico.
Well, we've talked about like Argentinian teams probably not being able to afford him, right? Either the transfer fee or the salary that he's going to demand after the salary he's receiving right now. Mexico makes a little more sense in that regard, right? They spend more money on this kind of stuff. So that would make more sense. But like a team like Monterrey, he doesn't start for that team in the form he's in right now. He doesn't play for that team in the form he's in right now. So that part of it doesn't make sense, but the money part makes it more realistic to me if that were to be an option.
Well, we want to talk about the possible rumor of a guy coming in. It's 23-year-old. I mean, he's just Hercules, right?
Hercules, and that is his real name. I was thinking this was a nickname. Like Brazil had Hulk, right? That was a nickname that was on his shirt. Hercules is this man's name.
Yeah, and so he currently plays for Fortaleza. I will again put in a pitch for Fortaleza Tequila, one of my very favorites. Not in any way related to that club, but I never want to pass on the chance to talk about tequila. And you actually watched a little film, I think, or a video on him.
I did, yeah. I fired up Y Scout. I figured I wasn't going to use all my credits for this month, so I was like, why not watch some of this guy? But yeah, a 23-year-old Brazilian midfielder. He's been with Fortaleza since 2021. This is his first season as a full-time starter for them, so he was kind of a rotational guy the last 2 years. This year, top 5 in starts and minutes on the team, who is currently in 3rd place in the Brazilian league as they're kind of rounding out the end of the season. So a good team in Brazil, and he's one of their most important players. his playing style, I'll say, like, if we're looking at what role he's going to slot into for Austin FC, it's very much in that Alex Ring role where he can play deeper as a lone six if you need him to, or in a double pivot, but he has enough offensive ability going forward to play in that box to box role, to play as one of those dual tins. Assuming he's the Ring replacement, like, I don't know that he's a massive upgrade across the board if we're looking at 2024 versions of these two players, but those progression lines are very much going in opposite directions, right? Like, Ring is on the downhill slope. This kid's very much on the uphill slope. Like, last year, he started 12 games, I think. He started almost every game this year. And so I think there was a part of the reporting on this was a $10 million release clause. I think this is important to note. Release clauses are there for the players. Those are there to protect the players, to say, if I get big enough that another team wants me, this is the number that we're going to set, the threshold we're going to set, that the team can't say no. If another team comes and offers more than this number, the team cannot say no. It does not mean that if the team is not getting offers that high, that they couldn't take a lower one. This kid is not getting sold for $10 million. He's not that good.
No. I mean, those are always like, yeah, they're always way above market. What one would call stupid money for any player is what a release clause is going to be, unless they happen to blow up and suddenly become worth it. But yeah, I don't think anybody has to worry about them spending that much on this player. He's an intriguing prospect. We'll see what happens. I imagine we're going to have a lot of talk about a lot of people from a lot of different places during this offseason. And there's no reason to believe, like I would trust Roto to make the right calls as he has so far.
Yeah, if this signing goes through, we'll definitely do a lot more research and I'll watch some more film. On a first glance, it doesn't seem like a huge game-changing signing for the team. But if the money is low and we can get like a club-friendly deal and contract like we've seen with the guys that Roto's brought in so far, I would call this a really good pickup. But if it's a huge contract, like, I don't know that it necessarily is.
Well, I think at this point, let's go ahead and take it to the preview with Dunny, and then it turns into a good conversation around being a player, around RSL, sort of around the Austin project. Like, it's a wide ranging interview, and it's definitely worth a listen.
Yeah, hang tight. We'll be right back with Brian Dunseth. All right, we are back. We are thrilled to be joined by Brian Dunseth. Brian played for several of the original MLS teams in the 90s and 2000s, and then transitioned into broadcasting, where he covered Real Salt Lake for many years before joining the MLS Season Pass crew on Apple TV, where he is currently one of my favorite analysts on the Apple TV crew. So, Brian, thanks so much for being here, man.
Yeah, thank you, man. Feel free to call me Dunny. The only one that ever offended me was the guy on the flight to Australia when he goes, "Mate, why do they call you Dunny?" And I was like, "Oh, Dunny, it's my nickname." He goes, "So you might want to have a rethink about that." And I was like, "Oh, why is that?" And he goes, "Because it's an outhouse. It's a shit Australia." And I was like, got it, understood. And then
good to know.
He was right, because when people call me Dunny, they looked at me as like, he's one of those dodgy guys, huh? Dodgy American. So, yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you. It makes me realize how long I've been around this league, and unfortunately how old I am at this point.
It's so funny though. I won't say your age on air, but like the aging of a professional athlete is just accelerated so quickly as compared to a normal citizen. You're not that much older than me, and probably around the same age as Jeremiah, but Jeremiah in his job is considered like in his prime. And you're old and washed up by the time you're 30 years old.
Yeah, no, I tell the story all the time. I think the hardest thing, because we're not doctors and lawyers, right, as athletes, and this is across the board, and especially kind of the late, like I came in 1997. It was actually July 4th. Here's how I'll date myself. It was July 4th, 1997, at the Rose Bowl against the LA Galaxy. I had just joined New England Revolution. Alexi Lawless was my center back partner, and 98 degrees sang the national anthem at the and so for those that don't know 98 Degrees, like Nick Lachey and like all that, like he was married to oh my gosh, I'm going blank. I can see your face right now.
Jessica Simpson.
Jessica Simpson. And like people are like, wait, what? Like Daisy Duke? And you're like, no, Jessica Simpson at the like. And so people, it's like MLS After Dark. Every time I like reference how long ago that was. So yeah, it's been a fun ride. And now kind of the nuclear arms spending of like watching the league start and then like going through the David Beckham phase at LA Galaxy, which is kind of like just fast forward at a rocket ship, the growth of MLS. And now seeing what 2.0 David Beckham with Lionel Messi looks like. The haves and have-nots, I call it the nuclear arms spending in Major League Soccer. It's pretty incredible. I'm insanely envious and jealous of the infrastructure that all these young soccer players in the United States have just out of their fingertips and sometimes just at their fingertips.
Yeah, there's teenagers at every MLS club in the academies who don't know how good they have it right now compared to what y'all had as pros.
To this point, I was telling the story. My boys were like, "Dad, who?" Because I had kids after I retired, and they're like, "Who are you, Dad?" And so they obviously watch Real Salt Lake, and I was like, "Well, it's kind of like Justin Glad, right? I was a guy that played a ton of games in MLS, flirted with the national team, just could never break through. My group was like Eddie Pope, Carlos Llamosa, Marcelo Balboa, Alexi Lalas, and then like Aguchi Onyewu, and those guys. And it was like couldn't break through. So I used the analogy Justin Glad. And one of my boys came back to me and goes, "Dad, I just saw the MLS Players Union salary. Justin Glad makes like $1.4 million. How much did you make, Dad?" And I go, like 110,000, maybe.
Oh man.
Yeah. So yeah, I always tell the story. When I retired, I made $12,000 the following year, because that whole process of like who you are as an athlete versus like what do you do afterwards. You're no longer the soccer player, so you're just the person. So it's like this whole kind of weird psychosis of like, how do I find a definition process of who I am as a person, but now who I am as like a professional.
Yeah.
And when sports are away, yeah, it's one of the reasons why I think it's difficult for people to kind of like find that next step. Unfortunately, I was lucky enough to kind of stay within the soccer lane, and carve out this little niche of being able to hang out with, I call him Tio Max Bretos every single weekend on Apple TV. So I'm really fortunate, really lucky.
Well, speaking of Max, we wanted to start off by asking you to send along our thanks because he gave us a shout out on the broadcast the other day. We really appreciate that. We get to talk to a lot of Apple TV talent and share some knowledge, and a few of them have told us like, no, I listened to you guys on the weeks we're covering Austin. So it was very, very cool to get a shout out on the air. So send our thanks to him. By the way, he did
like a little shimmy, like he dropped you guys, and he was like, and I was like, you kid that. Good for you, Brayden.
Yeah, he knew exactly what the reaction that he would get.
Yeah. I looked over at him. I was like, really? And he goes, uh-huh. And I was like, okay, Tio, I get you.
All right, well, let's jump into our RSL preview. Jeremiah, do you want to kind of run us through where RSL's at right now?
Yeah, we can set the stage a little bit. We're excited to have you on, Dunny, because obviously you know way more about RSL than we do. So right now, third in the West, fourth on points, played Portland on Saturday, drew 3-3. One thing is, I don't know that, it was news to me that I haven't seen a lot of it. This is now their sixth playoff appearance in the last 7 years, and I think like 14 out of 17. So I don't know if people necessarily think about RSL like playing beautiful soccer or being like I don't think like they get thought of along the same lines of like the LA clubs or like Portland or Seattle at the top of the league. So like maybe just talk about the way that this club has been so consistent over the years and it continues to make the playoffs season after season.
Yeah, it's been a sneaky amount of consistency where I think every year up until this year, or maybe even last year to a certain extent, there was a pretty big transition period from Dave Checkitz as an owner to Deloy Hansen, investor owner, to full owner, then basically a league-run team for the better part of 2 years on the backside of everything that happened kind of in the COVID window, with Deloy no longer being a part of the team and being effectively forced out of the club. And then the new ownership of David Blitzer and Ryan Smith coming into this team. But I think I'm an LA kid. I'm from Upland, California. Went to Cal State Fullerton, all this stuff. My grandparents were convert Mormon, so I always kind of grew up around the church. And when I was in Sweden and I heard that their Salt Lake was getting a team, and then John Ellinger, my assistant coach on the under-20 national team and the Olympic team, it made sense for me. So I understood when I got here, there was kind of like, and I know this sounds crazy for Salt Lake, but there was kind of like a grittiness to the fan base, knowing that they were never going to be outside of like Stockton to Malone years. This is a I don't want to use the word weird, but it's an interesting fan base that always has a chip on its shoulder, because it's never looked upon, as you rightly pointed out, the Seattles or the Portlands or the LAs. And so it's kind of caught in this little weird pocket of like, Denver? No. Like West Coast? Nah. But then, you get into this mentality of when RSL started after the first couple of years and Garth Lagerwey comes in, Jason Kreis goes from captain to head coach overnight. There became kind of like this philosophical approach of we can be the underdogs. And they've never really been great as being like the number one team or the leader or the top dog, but they've been thriving, I think, consistently as the team that was like, are you good enough? Are you like a playoff team? And I've always kind of like categorically put them between 4th position and 8th position in the Western Conference. And then these last couple of years with the investment of Blitzer and Smith, the infrastructure in the stadium was around $16 million, whether it was like the lights and the speaker. It's very Austin FC, and I think they took a lot of Austin FC and Q2 Stadium to try to update what the atmosphere looks like inside the stadium. And then it was fan experience, and it was all those things, and it was safe standing, and there was like a connectivity. But I think overall, it's a team that right when it gets the respect that it probably deserves on performance and results, all of a sudden it has weird hiccups, and they can't sustain that momentum to be a consistent, maybe heavyweight and or favorite in the Western Conference. And as we see the haves and have-nots, even in a year where a guy like Andres Gomez gets 13 goals and 9 assists and is all of a sudden sold to Rennes for $13 million, because you kind of got to make that deal, all of a sudden they regenerate with the next group of young and upcoming talent with Marchuk, who got his goal in his second start, with Lachlan Brook, and then Diogo Gonçalves, who had a great goal, who we thought was going to be the game winner, and ended up being the 90th minute goal that then led to the equalizer from Jonathan Rodriguez. So, yeah, trying to tell that big story in a short amount of time. It's a team that's been crazy consistent, but not good enough to take that next jump to lift trophies since the departure of Garth Lagerwey and Jason Kreis.
Yeah, it seems like the like under especially, I'm blanking on the coach's name right now. Yeah, Pablo Mastroeni's leadership, like they've always had that fight in them. Now it seems they have the talent to go along with the fight. Number one, of course, is Chicho Arango. Second in the Golden Boot race right now. He's been kind of in and out of the lineup lately. Do you expect him to start in this game on Saturday?
So heading into the All-Star break, Chicho was suspended, and it was never clarified exactly why he was suspended. But that came down from Major League Soccer. That didn't have to do with the Real Salt Lake. And the frustrating timing, I think, for the club's perspective was it was in that last game in Portland where they got taken apart 3-0. And it was heading into the All-Star break and then subsequently heading into Leagues Cup. And for Chicho to go back, Chicho was voted in as a starter. And at that stage of the season had 17 goals and I believe 9 or 10 assists. He was about to break Alvaro Saborío's single-season goal-scoring record for Real Salt Lake that's been held since I think 2011, 2012, in that time frame. So Chicho gets suspended, takes him out of the All-Star game. He was probably going to be voted captain with Lionel Messi and Luis Suarez picking up injuries ahead of that tournament. So things have gone sideways. And since subsequently, he's been injured. He's picked up hamstring injuries and he's picked up yellow card suspensions that he did down in Houston. So this risk versus reward, I think Pablo philosophically, he knows what his best 11 is. But coming off of the midweek result, he kind of found himself in this weird dynamic of, do I practice what I preach? And by that, do I give Anderson Julio, who's coming off a 2-goal performance, the start over Chicho Arango, even though Chicho Arango is back healthy and available after yellow card suspension? Do I give Matt Crooks and Diego Luna and Dominic Marchuk the start instead of bringing Diogo Gonçalves back in, who we paid a couple $1 million for. And by the way, Diogo started for Copenhagen against Manchester United and Bayern Munich in Champions League last season. Beforehand, it started for Benfica against Arsenal. I mean, you're talking about like an established number 10 Portuguese player. And so, yeah, they're kind of in this weird phase of, and I had this conversation with Steve Cherundolo ahead of last weekend, specific to Olivier Giroud, is how do you look at the summer transfer window of getting big name players in or selling big name players going out without changing the dynamic of the culture and the atmosphere and the intuition of the patterns of play and the movement? Because then all of a sudden you lose difference makers that know your system really well, and you bring in guys that are going to take time to adapt language, culture, identity, family, house, school, all these cars, little things that you don't really think about between the white lines for over the course of 90 minutes. So I think that's part of the challenge. For example, when you have Chicho Arango flying all over the place in the system, and he's got Andres Gomez to his side, they're intuitive with their movement, not necessarily structural. So now you put him up top, you put Diogo underneath, the rhythm looks a little bit different. You put Marchuk or Lachlan Brook wide, looks a little bit different, feels a little bit different.
Yeah.
And these guys are trying to understand the strengths and weaknesses, as well as like, if Chicho moves, can he hit that ball? Should I make that run? As opposed to anticipating versus hesitating or reacting. So, yeah, those are all little things, but I think most certainly when we look back at the end of the season, depending upon where Real Salt Lake ends, I think that suspension is going to be the data point that everybody looks at that says if Chicho Arango could have maintained that form through the course of the season and not had that suspension, he would not only have been up for MVP of Major League Soccer, that this team would have been in first place instead of the LA Galaxy at this stage of the season.
Yeah, and if you look at like playoff performances of RSL's past, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago when they didn't register a shot during regulation and ended up winning that game. That's not this team anymore, right? And so if he can come back into form coming into the playoffs, like this is a contender. This is a team that teams will be afraid to play.
This is why I don't think they're a contender. And I'll be super transparent and honest. And by the way, I always get either accused of being a homer for Real Salt Lake during a broadcast, or I could literally read you the messages that I got after the game, the Portland game. Like, did you just buy a house in Portland? You got no love for Real Salt Lake? It's just like, oh my God, this is why I have the job that I have. It's because I call it down the middle. Here's why Real Salt Lake is going to struggle, not only in the run-up to MLS Cup playoffs, but with their hopes and aspirations of winning the Western Conference. They have a goalkeeping issue, and it's been incredibly evident for a long time. It's been evident since Nick Romano left. They thought they had the right guy in David Ochoa, who's currently the backup to Hugo Lloris at LAFC. That didn't go in the direction as planned. They brought in Zach McMath from Vancouver after Romano retired, thinking that he was going to be a stable number 2 that could help develop the next generation of player. He played so well, he worked his way into the starting 11 after Ochoa left. Gavin Beavers, his talent is extraordinary. He's got a really high ceiling, but he's young, and he's making simple mistakes that shouldn't be made. And RSL has a problem in that both goalkeepers are effectively number 2s in Major League Soccer, and neither of them are putting together consistent performances that prove that they should absolutely be the number 1 goalkeeper. And that is going to be a big detriment to this group unless they can figure it out sooner rather than later.
Yeah, Austin's exactly the opposite, where we don't have much good going for us, but we can pretty much always rely on Brad Stuver.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we want to save some time to be frank, Austin's season is all but mathematically over. It's still, at this point, mathematically possible for them to make the playoffs, but it seems extremely unlikely. And so we want to save a little bit of time just to kind of pick your brain and not do a preview. But Jeremiah, do you want to run through what Fatma taught you about this game, and maybe we can leave it at that?
Yeah, not that we should. Well, yeah, it was interesting because the next thing I was thinking about kind of ties into what Tony was talking about with RSL and the players. So yes, fun facts from Fatma leading into this game. Austin scored 4 goals in the last 5 matches, hasn't scored in 2 home matches, hasn't won at home in the last 4 matches, and RSL's won the previous 2 matches against Austin FC. I forgot the previous match this season, which has to have been the worst game Austin played in Salt Lake, where Chicho scored a hat trick and RSL won 5-1. But I guess my question is, like, have you seen any of the new Austin players? And the reason your early comment kind of tied back to me is, like, on paper, Austin is better having these new guys in, but performance-wise, like points per game, they've been worse. And I think it comes down to that, like trying to insert like big international talent from the offseason in the middle of, not even in the middle, like 2/3 of the way through the season, and how do you integrate them into the team?
Yeah,
and I feel like it's particularly true with Bukhari. Like Osman Bukhari, I feel like is really talented, but it doesn't seem like he's really like gelled with the way the rest of the club like lines up.
So, okay, let me say this, because before I get accused, if anyone listening of this, Wolfie and I played together for the under-20 national team. We were part of the Olympic team. I love Josh Wolff as a person. So I just want to get that out first and foremost, because transparency, I think, is always important. I told this story on the broadcast against LAFC. I think it was 3 years ago when Austin beat LAFC at home. It was like the final 4 or 5 games of the season to establish themselves as the top dog in the Western Conference. And since then, things have kind of gone sideways, right? I am cognizant of the situation. The reality is this is a result-oriented business. And when you do not make the playoffs, for me, there's a clear-cut identity of success and failure, and failure is missing out on the playoffs. I think that goes across the board with any team in Major League Soccer. What I see from Austin, and I know fans will never be capable of understanding this because I'm a fan as well. I'm a fan of Manchester United. Disaster. What have you done for me lately? What are you doing for me immediately? I don't give a flying squirrel about 18 months from now. Tell me now what's happening.
Yeah.
How are you going to fix this? How are you going to make this better? And I think that's the challenge for Josh. It's for Josh. It's for Rodolfo. It's for ownership of this isn't good enough by your standards. It's not good enough by our standards. And then ultimately, for the hard-earned fans that are putting their butts in the seats and spending their money week in, week out, are like you guys, like absorbing and eating up so much information to support this group and to put this team on the pedestal it deserves, or at least you think it deserves. Well, you want to see action. You want to see actionable action. And that's the frustrating part for teams that miss out on the playoffs right now.
Yeah, I'm talking about Josh Wolff. I'm very much of the opinion that, like, just from what we've seen of him in these 4 years, that I don't know that he's necessarily a coach that's going to elevate a good roster. But I think if he had a really good roster, that roster would be successful. But as you mentioned earlier, this is a results-driven job. And so do you think that he can stay on for next season? Like, do you think there's a realistic possibility of him staying on? Like, say Minnesota wins this weekend, Austin loses this weekend, they're mathematically out. I would not be shocked if we got an announcement on Sunday or Monday that he's gone. Do you think there's a possibility that doesn't happen?
So I'll tell you, when Greg Berhalter was fired or whatever, departed U.S. men's national team, because of the previous influence, because of the previous relationship with Anthony Precourt, I thought that, well, there's at least one option right there. Whatever this looks like, and again, full transparency, I'm friends with Josh, played with Josh. Like, I love the human being. I can absolutely see if he doesn't make the playoffs, I could see Rodolfo Borrell, Anthony Precourt making a decision to go in a different direction if they feel like they have found somebody that is better suited for this group to take this organization to the next step. I can absolutely see it. But if you also said to me, hold on a second, Rodolfo Borrell respects Josh Wolff and his coaching staff, and thinks that with the right players that they can bring in the offseason and with the contracts they can shed heading into the offseason, that they can mimic what they did 3 years ago, that wasn't an outlier, that could be the consistent going forward, I could see that happening as well, much to the chagrin of plenty of fans down in Austin FC.
Yeah, it's tough, man. We had David Goss on the show not long ago, and he made the point that, like, regardless of the guy's talent, like, there might be a point where the players are just done with it too, and they're tired of hearing the same stuff every week. So it's
Well,
going to be.
It doesn't help. It doesn't help when your most expensive player is either retweeting or liking stuff
Oh yeah.
in the middle of a
Yeah.
game. I don't know if he's getting a tattoo during that and just actually like fidgeted or something, but I can
It's
tell
a very
you that,
specific set of tweets that he responded to.
yeah, it's not a good look from the outside looking in. And I would also just gently remind Sebastian Driussi that the contract that he has signed was based on the performance of that previous season, that of which he's not come anywhere close to these last 2 years. So I always find it interesting when the players find their voice in certain moments, when they have most certainly benefited from and are not matching what their current contract status is.
Yeah, but as we all know, Sebastian Driussi makes more money than Josh Wolff does, and is harder to replace than Josh Wolff is. So
just literally had that conversation today. We were talking about Lorenzo Insigne and the John Herdman quotes coming off Wednesday night. When Insigne came out in the 70th minute, and Herdman was saying that he's got to be on the field to win games. He can't be coming out. And I was like, that's a bold strategy when my man's making like $14 million a year. We'll see how that one turns out. But listen, at the end of the day, let me reiterate this point. Q2 Stadium and Austin FC fans, I've been a part of some really fantastic moments alongside Barretos over the years down there. Even when I was calling Real Salt Lake games and going down there and calling games. That team, that atmosphere, just the feel around the city, it's phenomenal. And I, for one, really hope that whatever needs to happen and to transpire to get the group of performances that we saw a few years ago matching what the expectations are of this group. Kind of you set that water marker. And if you don't match that water marker, it's a disappointment, right? It's a season of disappointment. We've seen what the group is capable of doing in front of the fan base. And that fan base deserves it. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can get back to that one day soon. But there's some work to be done in the off season for sure. All right, well, Brian, thanks so much for joining us. Brian Dunseth, do you have anything to plug? Do you want to give any Twitter handles? Or you said you don't have Twitter. Any social handles?
Yeah, I got rid of that disaster a couple of years ago. I'm just at Brian Dunseth on the other social media stuff like Instagram and TikTok and all that fun stuff. No, just doing the show alongside Max Bretos on MLS on Apple TV, and looking forward to this game, man. It's gonna be a really great game. I'm super excited about this one, and I believe Max and I have the Portland Austin game on the backside of this. So I apologize for the Austin FC fans that aren't friends of T.O. Max and I, as we've taken 3 out of the last 4 games.
All right. Well, Brian Dunseth, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Appreciate it.
All right. Big thanks to Brian Dunseth once again. Before we wrap up, we'd like to remind you to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Come find us on Twitter at LViaHero87 and JBentley_ATX, and then at Moon Tower Soccer on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Thanks so much for listening. We will be back next week to review the RSL match and then preview Portland and LA Galaxy matches and then cover any other Austin FC news that comes up. Till then, I'm Landon Cottom.
I'm Jeremiah Bentley.
We'll catch you next time.
When no one is around.
Thank for nothing, you never.
La gente
Oh my God.